So if your n8n workflow works perfectly in testing, but randomly breaks once real users start using it, this video is for you. Most people know how to build workflows, but very few people know how to make them production ready. So in this video, I'll show you some production patterns I use in real AI workflows so that they don't break when APIs fail or users spam them or something goes wrong. We're going to talk about how you can secure your entry point, in this case, your webhook node, and how you can design for flaky APIs, making failures visible and never exposing a naked webhook. So let's get right into it. So one thing I want to mention is that in production, your biggest risk is in bugs, right? It's who can trigger your workflow. So if someone can guess your webhook URL, they can trigger your entire automation. And I call this the naked webhook problem. So for instance, I have in here my n8n automation, which I built, and I did a tutorial about this specific automation in my previous video, which I'm going to link in this video as well. But on a high level, what this does is that this is connected to my front-end UI. So once a user uploads an image, basically the image is redesigned inside my n8n automation, and then it's being sent back to the front end. So the start of my automation in here is a webhook node. But there are a number of issues with this webhook node. The first one is the fact that I don't have any form of authentication. What this means is that anyone who is sort of like coming into my front end will be able to access this automation I built. In this case, they would even have access to my webhook URL, and I'll show you what I mean by that. Now, the other thing that could be a problem in here is, let's say if I didn't put in any like cause origin and I did star instead, what this means is that anybody coming from any website, regardless of coming from the specific website, which is in this case, this website which I deployed, and which is in this case, the AI designer website on TinyHost, anyone coming from any place, whether they are coming from their shell or anywhere, as long as they have access to my webhook URL here, they'll be able to communicate. And let me explain what I mean by that. So I'm just going to listen to an event, right? And I'm going to pull up my terminal, my shell in here, right? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and send in a request to my webhook node. So this is my terminal here. I'm going to type in this exact command inside my terminal. As you can see, I don't have any form of authentication. I'm just trying to hit the webhook node inside my n8n platform. So as you can see, this was successful. And if I should go inside n8n right now, you'd see that yes, the request did come through and it was successful. So what this means is that people can actually like call your automation. And if you have like APIs that you're hitting, you're paying for, they'll be able to have access to all of that. And they'll be able to use those API keys you're paying for without you having no knowledge of that. So I want to show you some ways in which you can fix this problem. So you can do this in multiple ways, but then I would say that the best way would be like having an API key in a header. It's simple and it works everywhere. So if you come into authentication here, you see that we have something called basic auth, header auth, JWT, and there's none. We don't want to do none, especially if you are in production. So we are going to start with the header auth, right? So let's say you want to do header auth. This is how you set it up. You select header auth and then you click on create new credentials. And in here, you can give it a name, right? What's usually common and what I've usually seen is having something like this as the header name, which is in this case, you can have like X-API-key. And then in here, you can put in what the value is. It should be like a sophisticated, like pattern or something that is not easy to guess, right? So you can have, let's say, don't do 1, 2, 3, but the point I'm trying to make is that you just want to have a secret or sophisticated string so that it's not common for people to guess it out and call your automation. So let's say I do 1, 2, 3, right? And then I save this, right? And then I already have this done, right? If I come back here and I'm listening to an event and I go back into my terminal in here, right? And I type in the same command I did earlier on, I don't expect this to work. So you can see that this didn't work, right? So what I have to do now is I need to pass in the API key that I defined, which in this case is 1, 2, 3. If I should do this now, you see that this is not working. So that's like one quick and easy way for you to sort of like tighten your webhook a lot more, just so that people cannot have access to it. And like I said, in terms of how you would want to do this, you just want to make sure that you are sort of using like a long random secret key so that people cannot easily guess it. And you would want to do this in scenarios whereby you control the caller, meaning this is your own own front-end application. It's your own script. It's your own automations. So you want to do that. And the reason why you'd want to do that is that this is actually one of the best ways, and it's easy enough, it's secure enough for most use cases, and you don't need any extra infrastructure. You don't have to pay for extra ways of like handling this. Now, let's say you want something stronger than just having like the header API. The other thing you can do is you can use like the basic auth, right? So instead of like header auth here, you can just select basic auth. And then if you click on create a new credential, in this case, you'd have like a username and then a password, right? And you'd want to use this when like you want it to be compatible with multiple tools. So you already have a front end that is passing in a username and a password. So you can make sure that like that username and password is passed to this automation, and you must make sure that it sort of matches this one as well. The downside to this is that people often accidentally reuse the same password everywhere. So they have the same password for their emails, the same password for their Facebook account. So once people get hold of one password, maybe it's just so easy for them to like guess what the username is, because people tend to use these credentials all the time. So it has a downside in the sense that like if your password is weak, then people can have access to it, right? It's also less API-ish than like modern applications. Like for most of the applications I try to connect to, most of them like will just give you like an API key and all that. Now, the other thing you can use, which is the most secure for public applications actually, is signed request or HMAC. So you use this when your webhook is public facing and you expect untrusted callers, right? You have a lot of traffic coming to your webhook. Some people will be malicious, some people would want to get in. So you want to make sure that you've tightened it a lot more. And how this works is that like a sender will create a signature from the body using a shared secret, and then n8n would sort of verify the signature before doing anything. And I think this is really great because it stops replay plus tampering. But this is also, on the other hand, very hard because you must implement signing in whatever calls a webhook. So for instance, depending on what is sort of like calling your webhook, you'd have to like implement some form of signature or signing to be able to implement this form of authentication. Now, there's also another one in here, which is JWT auth. And this is if you want to provide user-based access, then you want to do this. So basically, you use this form of authentication when each user must be authenticated as themselves first before calling in your application. And what this usually means is that your app verifies the user's OAuth or JWT, then your backend would call n8n, right? Or it would pass like a verified token and say that this has been verified, so let's like give it access. It's not ideal if you are not doing any sophisticated like application. If it's just like a tutorial, and I'll say like you don't need to go through the hassle of everything. Just go with the header auth or like using the API key and you'll be fine. So yeah, I mean, in a nutshell, when it comes to authentication and securing your workflows, this is like the rule of thought or the rule of thumb, right? This is how you should decide. Like if it's just you, it's your own tooling, it's your own application that you built, then it's just easy for you to like configure it to accept API keys, just like most applications do, and then you'll be fine. If you are getting like other people calling it, then you need to have like something stronger, which is like basic authentication, and always also include this allowed origins, which is cause, right? Just so that you are able to limit the number of untrusted callers coming to hit your webhook, right? And then if you are doing anything internet facing and you want to tighten it even more, then you can use the HMAC signatures. And then finally, if you want to do some form of a user identity, then you can use OAuth or JWT by your front-end application. So that's really it with the security part of things. The next concept I want to talk about is implementing retry logic. I'm going to use this exact automation you see in here. On a high level, I'm going to explain what this automation does. And I've done some tutorials on how to build this automation inside n8n. But on a high level, this automation is similar to the first one where you are designing a room, but this time around you upload a product image and then it generates a flyer for you. The Gemini endpoint here sometimes does fail. So in order for you to implement retry logic so that when this fails, you sort of have the fallback or you sort of give it the opportunity to rerun it. Sometimes things may fail not because there's anything wrong in the input or anything, because you are just depending on some other application, right? And this happened to me recently when I was sort of like working with Gemini. I think they had changed one one of their models. And so I was calling that model and it wasn't working. And then I had to like just wait and then it started working. So things like that do happen because like companies are developing on top of the applications all the time. So in order for you to implement retry logic, you can click on the node and you click on settings and then you check the switch that says retry on fill. And then you can give it like a max retry of 2. I think that's safe, or you can say 3. I believe the default here is 3, but don't make it retry forever because sometimes the issue is really within how you've configured the node, right? Sometimes it's not really about the third party or about the application provider. And then the wait time between tries, maybe you can keep it at 5 seconds or 5,000 milliseconds, or it depends. Like I was working on a project where you were sort of like trying to complete a spreadsheet with about 2,000 rows and it kept breaking, right? So this is something that can help prevent that in the sense that like you just give it time to rest before you try it again. So this is good. So once you do this and you realize that it's still failing, then this is your cue to know that this isn't really a problem on the third party. This is really a problem with your own configuration. And then you can come in and set it up and correct it as well. Now, the other thing I want to talk about is like error handling, right? Workflows will fail all the time. And I know like you are building AI automation so that people can depend on it, so that they can delegate some parts of their work to it. But in reality, sometimes things will fail, right? The challenge really should not be the fact that something failed in production. The main thing we should be thinking about is that like if it fails, at least you want to know about it. So I'm going to show you 2 ways in which you can implement error handling inside n8n, especially if you're building AI automations for production. So the first error handling I want to talk about is leveraging like the global error trigger node. So like I have this workflow in here. Maybe let me just delete this. What's the global error trigger node does is that like once you publish it to production, like it's able to see your workflows that are in production, like the ones you've tagged it with, and basically it can alert you that something has failed in production, right? So in order to implement that, you just create a new workflow and then you look for like the error trigger node, right? Which will trigger the workflow when another workflow has an error. And so like, let me just do effective test. So you see like, it's like, it gives you an example error message and all that. But in here as well, you can even have like retry logic and all that. Okay, so this is the error trigger node. But what makes it interesting is that you can connect this to like other tools, right? So for instance, I can connect this to my Gmail, right? Or if your team is looking at Slack, you can connect it to Slack. So I'm just going to connect this to Gmail. So what would happen is that, right, anytime there's an error in any of my workflow, and you can configure this to even give you like the exact workflow that has the error, right? So anytime there's an error with my workflow, I want this global error trigger node to just send me an email, right? So I'm just going to publish this and then I'm going to go into the workflow, which I know is faulty. So I'm just going to come in here and I'm just going to run this again. And once it fails, I know that this is going to fail. So once it fails, it's just basically going to send me an email telling me that this failed. Okay, so as you can see, this has failed. If I should go into my email right now, I should receive an email telling me that, you know what, this workflow has failed in production. So that is a good way for you to sort of know that your workflow has failed production. Now, if you don't want to even use the global error trigger node, there's also another node you can use inside the workflow itself. But this is as useful as you being in the workflow. But let me talk about this anyways. So this is the stop and error node, right? So the stop and error node, really, you can connect it to like any critical nodes you have. So in this case, I know that this is likely to fail. So what this will do is that if this fails, it will stop the entire workflow, right? So if I come in here and I just say an error has occurred, and then if I should run the entire workflow again, it's going to show me a pop-up that an error has occurred with this workflow. And so I should go check it out. All right. As you can see, it's saying problem in nodes are set up, an error has occurred. So it's telling me that an error has occurred. And so at that point, if I know that, okay, this is the exact node I'm expecting, then I'll see it that way. So yeah, like at the end of the day, what I want to say is that like you shouldn't be worried that your automations are going to fail in production, but then you should be more worried about like how can you equip your automations or how can you tighten them so that even if they fail in production, you're aware that something failed or something did not fail. If you are going to take just one thing from this video, I want it to be this, like Production workflows are not about features. They shouldn't be about features. They're supposed to be about defensive design. And if you want real-world AI automations or real-world patterns like this, I encourage you to subscribe to my YouTube channel. I also do have a school community where I drop all the templates and all my tutorials in there, and other tips and courses I created as well in there. So if you're interested in joining my school community, I'm going to leave the link in the description box so that you can join as well. Thank you for watching as usual, and see you in the next one.